Hello and welcome back to the Tabletop Team Podcast. I am your host, Joe, and with me, as always, I'm joined by my two amazing co-hosts, both still trapped in Ohio.
One day I'll get out. Probably not. Might be in a coffin, but hey.
You know you guys are supposed to say your names at the beginning of this in case if new people join, right?
Why would you want to know my name? No, my name is Michael.
Yeah, I'm Julian. I'm over here. I'm in Ohio. It's all right.
And with us this week, we also have our very first guest, not including all the interview episodes I did in season 1. Let's ignore those.
I was like, wait a second, I've been a guest before.
We're not including those interview episodes.
He's a returning guest.
For the new format, our first guest.
Okay, I was just saying, I feel hurt. Hi, I'm that guy. I've played D&D with Joe a whole bunch for years and years.
Live from New York, it's Sunday Night Depression.
Hey, you shut your face.
You shut your face. It may be true, but you shut it still.
I'm about 2 minutes away from Joe up the road, so this is apparently New York/Ohio podcast.
Cover all the bases.
So this week we're actually doing something a little bit different. We are actually focusing in on something very specific this week instead of having some sort of broad topic. This week we are going to be talking about Clue, the D&D edition, and then in the D&D section we're going to be talking about a game of D&D I ran that had a lot of Clue involved in it. So that'll be fun. So I'm just going to start this right off.
It was Colonel Mustard in the dining room with the revolver.
Yes. If only it was that simple.
I hate how it's always that way.
This game was garbage. Absolute garbage. I understand, companies wanting to, hop on the bandwagon and scrabble just a little bit of money out of that little niche market that they have. But if you're going to make a new version of Clue and call it D&D Clue, at least change the fucking map. Come on, people. It is the exact same game with just a little bit of flavor text.
Okay, well, counterpoint. Have you ever played any of the Monopoly clones, like Disney Pixar Monopoly or something like that? Or
No.
It's the same board. You can't mess with the board. It's tried and true.
You can. You can absolutely mess with the board. You can throw the board out the window as far as I care.
You mess with the names of things and how things are, how things work, but you don't mess with the actual board.
I'm just saying, change it up just a little bit. Make it worth buying. And this is a greater rant about the entire state of capitalism in America to begin with. But every game just feels like, oh, hey, this was something wildly popular. Let's make basically the same game, change it just a little bit, and call it something brand new.
I'm convinced that Hasbro, the company that now owns Clue, just goes, okay, what's a popular thing right now? Oh, D&D, oh, Pokemon, oh, whatever. And they just go, all right, change it up, add some new graphics, spin this thing out.
That's absolutely what they do.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I was just about to say. So you have understood the ways of, God dang it, Hasbro.
They're at it again. They're at it again.
They own so many things and they just ruin them.
They're like the EA of board games.
You're not wrong.
Or more likely, EA is the Hasbro of video games.
I do want to say, for the first time also on this podcast, all of us here have played this game together. So we found a way. We got on Tabletop Simulator and played Clue D&D on there. So we all played it. We had the same experience. So we all kind of have a similar vibe on how we felt about it. But let's just talk about actually playing it and the slight differences that there are in it. And then we'll go into more what we liked. There's got to be at least one small thing because I have an opinion. And then all the big list of all the negatives. We'll deal with that later.
So you say we have similar experience.
At least
stuff.
Me, Julian, and Mike have similar ideas.
You have to realize that I won.
That's true. That's true. That definitely can improve anything.
I had a great experience.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had a really fun time playing that game, and even playing it online, how we did, which was more complicated than I think it could have or should have been, maybe we had it in person. But yeah, playing it was a lot of fun to just, hang out and play a game together. So I had fun maybe playing a game rather than this specific game. So I still had a really good experience.
100%. I loved playing with our whole group plus Julian's wife. That was very fun. So let's talk about the game itself. So the main difference is Mike mostly covered them in his rant. They changed the name of the rooms and the art on it. All the characters you can play as are no longer color coordinated people, but just D&D named people.
Complex names.
Changed all the weapons to be D&D related. And then the one thing that I liked but got barely used is they have these things called like wandering monster tiles. I think that's the exact name of them. And the idea is you stand on it, you draw a card from the monster deck, and then it'll tell you what you have to roll. And if you beat it on that roll, you get to have a one-use item which can change how the game works. So there was one that lets you roll 2 dice and you take the higher. There's one that lets you freely look at someone's hand, I think it was. There's one that lets you, and this is the hardest one, you have to roll a 6 on the die to beat the beholder, but you get an item that lets you look at one of the cards in the, I think it was the scroll in this case, but it's the confidential folder with the answer in it.
I think that mechanic of battling something was really fun, especially when, because I know there's a point where Joe, Rothio, and I were all standing near one, and we were all battling to see if we could get to that location first. And that was a lot of fun, because then I think Rothio got it, and she had to roll like a 4 or a 5, and she lost. And then mine was like I had to roll over a 2, and I instantly got that. And so that was even more fun to just, throw that right in her face. and so that was probably the peak of my playing right there.
And you're sleeping on the couch now, right?
No, she threw that away too.
So it's the love seat.
Yeah.
He doesn't quite fit.
She found an old rug from when we were dating. She laid that outside. She's like, "Here you go."
So I didn't particularly enjoy the combat, and this is mostly because if you lose to the monster, you get stuck into the maze, I think it was called, and if you don't roll a certain number, you don't get out. Well, much like in D&D, if it takes 20 minutes to get to your turn and you get to make one roll and fail that roll and then another 20 minutes go by, you get kind of bored pretty quickly.
I feel like that could have been improved if they had like the Monopoly jail doubles rule of like you've got 3 rounds of jail. If you roll doubles, you get out of jail. But on the 3rd round, if you don't roll doubles, you still get out.
Yeah, just even hearing what you said, I think that if you had a home rule, that was the rule, that would make game, because I didn't get stuck in the maze, but I know that Mike, you were stuck there for a while.
Yeah, I was stuck for like 4 straight turns until the end of the game. I was like, cool, this game's over.
Yeah, and that's what sucks about this specific game is that every action you do on your turn has to be meaningful. Like I know that during the first round, I got all the way to a room but didn't enter the room because I didn't know I could go right into it. And then someone pulled me across the map and I was entering another room. So like I had like 2 wasted turns right there, or at least not wasted, but they could have been improved turns.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a question because I haven't played Normal Clue in forever. Do you not roll 2 dice for movement in Normal Clue? No, it's
1 die.
1 die still? Okay. Because, when I pulled out, not to jump ahead of ourselves, but when I got the Clue board game for our D&D session, it came with 2 dice. So I'm assuming it's just so everyone can have more dice.
Yeah, it's actually a rare edition, man. It's probably worth some money.
Probably.
I mean,
you shouldn't have opened it.
Your Mr. Green figure does look like the Stonks meme.
But going back to Clue D&D edition, it's going to get a little confusing as things go on. So yeah, the wandering monster mechanic was interesting to add, but the thing is, once you get into a room, it's like you're not really wandering the halls anymore. You still like, it's definitely much more strategic to go even just from the room you're in to go to the next room so you can learn more information, because like once everyone's in a room, then almost the monster tiles became irrelevant to us.
Yeah, can I interject there?
Yeah.
So I didn't fight a monster at all. I know we were playing D&D Clue, but I just played Clue.
And that's why you won.
I mean, honestly, it wasn't that much different.
Well, the other thing is like instead of, I had my handwritten notebook and I used all of the special deduction of like, ooh, well, this person showed this person this, so that means that they must have either this or this. and I color coded it and all because I'm a nerd. But the point is, I would have liked to be involved with more of the D&D aspect of D&D Clue, but there was just not enough incentive for me because all of the monster tiles were just like in random locations. There were like 4 or 5 or maybe 6 of them. And it's like, why would I go and fight a monster and potentially fail if I could just go to a room and guarantee myself that I have learned some new information?
That's an excellent point. Sorry to cut you off, but that's an excellent point that some of the monster tiles were like off by themselves and no direct line to another room. So you really did have to waste almost 2 turns going to the tile and then returning to wherever you were going.
Yeah.
I know.
And
It was basically impossible to accidentally stumble upon one unless you were completely not paying attention.
Right.
I think the way, if I remember the board correctly, it was like almost, there was one near almost everyone's starting position. So you could hit, I think, because like I remember hitting one like almost right off the bat. I just didn't roll high enough to get there on my first turn. But I think like there's that. But then after that, it's like, it's pointless. There was the one tile, as Julian was saying, him and Rocio were going after, and that was just because I was like, we got to do more of this monster stuff. We got to be able to see a little bit more of this game, because I was trying to be like reviewer mode Joe a little bit.
You're trying to review the game. I'm in it to win it, baby.
And you did, so shut up.
I think another thing that might make the game a little bit is having more tiles, but inside the little cards that you draw to figure out the monster, there could be traps, and with minor things, you know what I mean, like, or even minor bonuses, like just really small, like go another step or go to this room, or trapdoor, you enter and you go to the dragon's den or whatever one of those was. Like, and that would just spice up the thing, and it would make it feel like I went out of my way to get to this monster. And you know what, maybe I didn't get a bonus action, but I do get to be in a room and already,
I mean, there's 2 things that I can think of that would make it better, in my opinion. One would be, instead of it just being wandering monsters, is just every room is set up with a mimic in it, and like as you enter that room, to accuse that room, oh hey, also there's a mimic and now you have to fight the mimic.
Oh yeah.
The other way that I could think of that would be a better way to improve it is like in the pandemic expansion, add the bioterrorist role, where there is someone who's playing the game who, like, they don't kill you outright, but they initiate combat and they're chasing you down, and they're trying to stop you from solving the murder because ultimately they're in on it. It would change it up just a little bit, whereas like, oh, I have to worry about this and this, as opposed to just, this is Clue, and except maybe occasionally, if I try, I can get to a monster space.
That was one thing that was interesting was, again, we played it on Tabletop Simulator, and the person who made that map included a DM optional rule. And the only reason I didn't want to do that is because I wanted to play like the base game. Like, you don't want to add stuff and review that.
Yeah.
But it did have things where it was like, if somebody got defeated by a certain monster, there would be a DM character, quotation marks, because nobody could see me doing it besides the 4 on this video. But if they got beaten by, say, the skeleton, you put the skeleton on the board, and the DM, when it's their turn, they can roll a die and actually move the skeleton around the board to like chase the other people.
Oh.
I believe the only thing is you could not go into a room or block a door. Like, that was the only rules, but it was kind of meant so you could pursue the heroes.
Yeah, that would definitely make it a lot more entertaining, and I understand why they made that an optional rule, because otherwise you're just playing Clue.
I should also mention that this should be important. I'm pretty sure the average game of Clue is supposed to take like 30 to 45 minutes. We did like a 2-hour session for one game.
What? Was it really that long?
That's because in between every turn there was at least 10 to 15 minutes where no one knew whose turn it was, and they were just like dicking around and making jokes.
You do have to realize that we were playing on Tabletop Simulator, and I don't know what anybody else's experiences with that are, but I had just bought it earlier in that day and installed it.
Yeah.
So like, it's not hard to understand, but it's weird to like move everything with the mouse and then figure out the camera. And it's a whole lot, if we were playing in person, I would pick up a die and roll it.
Yeah.
And that would take 2 seconds.
And we all just flipped the table.
Yeah. But handing the die to the next person that's their turn, there was a couple times where I was like, oh man, like, and this has nothing to do with the game, but the simulator is, oh, it's my turn. Okay, where are the dice? Or where's the die now?
Where is everything?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Another thing I thought would be improvement is especially if you did like team D&D Clue, is if when you did battle a monster, like let's say we did 2-on-2, then we both get to roll and take the higher roll, and then we get to as a team use that ability card. I don't know, that'd be interesting.
I think it'd be interesting for some of them, but like, if suddenly, Clue's at a minimum 3-player, maximum 6-player game. If suddenly 2 people, that's like a good chunk of the group. Say you get the Beholder item, suddenly 2 people instantly know one of the items in the scroll case or whatever. And I think that would maybe like if you're trying to get the game to speed along, but I think that would be it would imbalance it, I'd say.
Yeah, probably. I don't know enough about Clue.
I don't know all of the different power-ups and stuff that you could get by defeating a monster. Well, there were like, 5 or 6 monsters?
Yes.
But, I mean, even the Beholder one, as rare as that is, like you said, you had to roll a 6 to beat it. I think that is an insanely overpowered reward as just getting to know what it is. I mean, unfortunately, I don't really know what you could give in replacement for as a player reward in the basis of Clue.
Look at another player's card for free.
Yeah, just like a random card.
That was one of them. It was like you can. I think it was very specific how it was laid out. It was like you can specifically say like, does anybody have this card? And everyone, and if anybody had it, they had to show you.
Yeah, but then everybody would know.
Well, no, I guess, but I think that's what the item was.
Unless you worded it like, well, no, that wouldn't.
She wrote it on a piece of paper and like handed it around, and
but then everybody would know that too.
Unless you got lucky and picked the right person the first time.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is way too complicated.
Yeah,
Abandoned ship.
I don't know. I like the little like reward systems that it was going for, but I think it's very hard to implement them into a game like Clue that is very technical, that is very, logic based and eliminating certain options based on what you know and what other people might know and this, that, and the other thing. But then D&D, I mean, the spice of D&D is random. That's the thing that makes it fun, whereas if I'm playing as my Ranger Henrik, who's got like ridiculous like plus 13 to hit or something like that. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll hit this. And then even if I roll a 2, it's still a 14. But if I roll a 1, which is a 5% chance, that's a random, it's critical fail. That's what makes D&D fun. It's not just like, you don't just set up your character to instantly succeed at everything, because you can always roll a 1. And with Clue being such a logistics-based type game where my brain was just running like, yes, this happened, so therefore this had to have happened. There was no randomness in that. I don't really know how well it mixed.
I mean, one of the ways that you could solve that is every room gets a token on it. And I brought this up with the Mimic idea, but every room gets a token put into the corner of the room. And there are X number of mimics, but you don't know which room has a mimic in it. So the first time you'll figure it out pretty quickly, but at least there'd be some aspect of randomness. It's like, oh, hey, is this a room I can go in? We'll find out.
An ambush would be a pretty cool thing if you were in a room and then had, even if you had like roll a die or something to see if you got ambushed, if it was like a 1 in 6 chance or anything like that. More randomness would help it feel more like D&D.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really complex to combine two things that really aren't very similar, Clue and D&D. But I think you could homebrew some rules, especially like what we're talking about, and put it into that tabletop simulator or even your game at home.
I think it's just one of those things where you can put Clue into the game Dungeons and Dragons, but you can't really put Dungeons and Dragons into the game Clue, because I have the feeling that, now I haven't personally experienced, but I have the feeling that that's going to work way better if you have something to that effect where it's a whodunit. I mean, that's a classic easy quest to set up. And
oh yeah, but you guys are going to love D&D Uno.
Is that where everyone gets a D20 and try and roll a 1?
You know what? Fuck it. I gotta do a quick Google search.
Oh,
Instead of like the reverse card, it's like a counterspell card.
Goodness.
The skip is just a banishment.
Well, there's no D&D edition of Uno, but people have made.
All right,
magic-
Hasbro. I'm right here saying I'm going to sign over the rights. We get a good, contract going. Wait, how do we lock this in with Hasbro?
People have made magic item cards that are Uno themed. So there's reverse card on the first instance that you take damage until the beginning of your next turn. The creature that dealt the damage takes it instead.
Oh my god! Imagine just no Ewing, like a dragon's breath attack.
Let
As
me
a
read
wild
these.
plus
Skip card.
4, they just have to roll on the wild magic sorcerer 4 times.
Hold on, wild draw 4. You make one attack as part of this action, dealing an additional +4 damage, changing the type of damage to one of your choosing, and causing them to become paralyzed until the end of your next turn on a hit.
See, I like my idea better.
These are obviously all homebrew, like jokey items, but still, I love the wild magic table though.
I can confirm that Joe likes the wild magic table. He has implemented it in many ways throughout the years of me playing D&D with him.
I don't know what it is. How does it work?
Roll a D100, and then there's a set list of potential things that can happen. So Joe has had that, like put into items and characters and basically anything else that applies to. He likes the D100 rolls.
It's like that one app you implemented in the Satio campaign where it was like roll like a 4-digit number and you get a result. And Alfred had ears that folded in.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. I loved that.
Yeah, that was another like wild magic thing. That was like an app I found that you roll like 4 D10s and you put like whatever number you get into it, and then it tells you like some wild magic effect. Most of them were like pretty harmless, to be honest, but they were fun. Yeah, I love the table. I use a homebrew table for my games now where there's not only 100 different options compared to the normal player's handbook version, which only has 50, but then you also have another 200 options because it's like you roll a d20 first to see how severe it is.
Oh yeah.
And that's really fun because then you could do things like severe, mild, and then like a nuisance or something. And nuisance being like the weakest effects, and so I can throw that in and have people roll on the wild magic table without having any severe consequences of insta death or a fireball cast on you. It'll just be like, oh, you turn blue for a minute, or you see your own death.
Severe, you stab yourself in the eye.
Oh man, yeah. I'd hate that one. Who would want to be blue?
Listen here, Green Man.
I do recall a section or a session where one of the players was 10% of their weight and like half their height or something, and he was just like, it was in the middle of combat, and he's just like, "Is this me now?"
Oh
and
no!
then a minute later, it wore off.
That's the joy of playing with our Barwalk group is they don't know anything about D&D, so
nice.
they're surprised by everything.
This is just permanent now. Guess I'll die.
Okay, so we should probably get a little bit back on track. We talked about the base game of D&D Clue. I think we talked about what we liked about it. There's just a couple more things I want to talk about that I don't like, and right off the bat, it's the characters. So I actually pulled up a list of all the names of the characters, and
they're all
they
unpronounceable.
are Regdar, the human fighter, Tordek, the dwarf fighter, Lida, the halfling rogue, Mialee, Mialee, the elf wizard, Ember, the human monk, or Nebin, the gnome wizard. Now, that got really annoying because it's way easier to say Colonel Mustard, Mr. Green, Miss Scarlet, Mrs. Peacock.
And like the classes were just an unnecessary addition. Like it didn't impact the game really at all.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it didn't change any of like if you happened to go for a monster, it didn't matter if you were what race you were or what class you were. It was just a simple die roll to see if you won or not.
It was just a flavor thing that just made things more complicated.
Yeah, it felt like you were just wearing a t-shirt that, like you have no other skills but like this title today.
Yeah. Also, our game of D&D Clue really enlightened me to the fact of how worthless the weapon tokens are.
Oh, yeah.
No. Oh, man,
just
yeah.
in regular Clue, too. Like, there's 0 point in them.
What do you
mean?
mean?
You just keep moving them to different rooms.
So, like... The actual
okay.
Physical,
yeah,
and even include the revolver and the knife. Like, there's no point.
I never understood why people had those. Like, why was this included in the game?
I do disagree with that. I think it is a good visual representation, and it helps people like me, anyways, keep track of where everything is. I like them. I've always liked the little pieces in Clue, but again, that's
not saying I
just
don't
me.
like them. I just feel there's no need for them.
Well, that was coming from the guy that won, so maybe we weren't using them correctly.
It's not just coming from that. It's just coming from like I like having confirmation that even though I know for a fact that I can suggest that this weapon was in here, it just makes more sense in my brain if I see it. Like if you're playing like 2-card poker and you pick up your hand and you're like, okay, I've got the Queen of Diamonds and the 5 of Spades. You can just keep that in your brain. But every time, I'm still going to keep looking at them and like, do I really have the Queen of Diamonds? Do I really have the Queen of Spades? Like,
I have no trust in this game right now.
or 5 of Spades? Yeah.
No object permanence. Got it.
Yeah. Maybe it's just something personality-wise where I'm
you
just
rolled
like,
a 3
I
on
need
perception.
to make sure. But I know. It helps me. It makes the game more fun for me, anyways. But I understand the other argument too. Functionally, they don't do much.
Like it almost seems like I almost wonder if the person who like designed it before they made the rules, like maybe they designed it like you have to find the weapons first. Like you have
I
to go
think
into a
they
room
just wanted to cast the weapons and have them as like a marketing thing. Like, wow,
yeah, I guess.
6 pawns and 6 unique weapons, because like Monopoly's got like all the different unique player icons, but whereas Clue, everybody's just a pawn originally. They were just a colored pawn, and they all looked similar. And then they had the I think 5 of them were made out of metal, and then the rope was made out of plastic.
Yep.
The original game, back when it first started, all of them were made out of pewter and string, and then they eventually moved over to plastic string or plastic rope.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I have to ask this, but this is just me knowing your personality. Are you bullshitting us or are you being serious?
Oh, I'm being super serious. I got some Clue info if you want it.
I have to check.
The game started back around World War II, like in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. People were in England were playing a game called Murder, and they were having these like murder dinner parties. And when the war started in World War II, people weren't really going outside their house anymore because they were getting bombing raids and everything, and they really couldn't afford to do anything. So the guy and his wife that came up with Clue, they used to play a game called Cluedo. Well, when it got to America, they just called it Clue. But these people, they came up with this board game to play murder in your home. And that's how it started. Yeah.
I can confirm most of that. I don't know, how much of that is true, but I've heard stories very
5%.
similar to that.
At least 5%. Yeah.
Like I have heard stories very similar to that. And the first Clue board that I learned how to play Clue on was one that my father and my uncle, his brother, originally owned back in like the early 60s. I don't know when the board was made, but I know it's been around for a very long time. And I also know that very similarly to that, Monopoly was invented around the Depression era, where people were, playing Monopoly and being able to own property and have a lot of money made people feel good, considering it was the Great Depression.
Little did they know, 100 years later, it'd be the exact fucking same.
Hey, we still got 10 more years until the 2030s.
Okay.
So does anybody have any more comments about Clue D&D edition before we move on?
Don't buy it. It's not worth the money. If you have Clue, you have the game, essentially.
That's the same thing with any third-party involvement in a game. Like I mentioned, like I have Disney Pixar Monopoly, and I've got, honestly, I think we even had like a John Wayne Monopoly. I don't know why you would ever want something as specific as that, but they made it. I had Star Wars, the Clone Wars Monopoly. They're all just the same game. And unless you really have a reason that you want that like third-party involvement like D&D, just to say that you have it as a collector's item, sure.
Yeah.
To play it, it's not really that much different, and I would not suggest it.
I agree.
So to kick things off with some D&D news, fun fact, this dropped the day after we recorded our last session. So Wizards of the Coast announced their next big miniature project, and by big, I mean big.
Yeah, it seems like an oxymoron with the whole big miniature.
They have announced that they are making Tiamat into an official miniature. and it looks like it's coming pre-painted. It's freaking gigandamungus. It is, according to this picture, its specs are 16.8 inches by 28.9 inches.
Oh.
They say things like, there's a couple quotes here, like from Wizards of the Coast saying, remember, she isn't just a statue. We want folks to play with her on their table, which is pretty cool that they don't just collect it, use it, please.
Don't just collect it, kill your party.
That thing's pretty enormous.
Was this like a dragon hydra?
So Tiamat is
All
the
of the
draconic goddess of dragons and chaos, basically chaotic evil incarnate. And they have 5 heads. Each one is of the main color spectrum of dragons. And so when you're battling Tiamat, as we mentioned before, it's pretty much instant death no matter what level your party's at. But each head does like the breath attack of their equivalent element, and it's like the damage levels of a legendary dragon. And then they're also Tiamat's like immune to magic. What was it, like 5th level and lower? 6th level. Holy crapola.
Yeah. No,
so yeah,
that's a TPK with wings.
So what situation would you be in where you're battling this thing?
In the official Horde of the Dragon Queen campaign, your minor spoilers if you have, or currently in that, your whole goal is you are supposed to stop the Cult of the Dragon from summoning Tiamat. And if you don't, that's how Tiamat comes back into the world and kills you all.
So it's set up as like an insta-fail situation, like where if you don't prevent this, you are going to die. It's not set in stone that you're going to die, but it's pretty obvious that you're gonna die.
So has anyone ever workshopped a way to actually, battle it successfully?
I mean, you theoretically could with enough PCs, but you would probably need 20th level PCs of like larger than the Critical Role camp. So we're talking like 10 plus player characters.
Wow. You could also probably, it wouldn't be perfect, but you could probably also do like what they did in NADPOD. I'll try to use this as least spoilery as possible, but basically a giant monster was attacking a city, and so the city had like artillery that did damage every turn, and the main heroes were like out fighting the monster, and like the army was off fighting the smaller monsters. So you could probably do something similar to that. The other thing I wanted to say is, Julian, to your question of when would you drop Tiamat, well, according to the classic Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, you could drop that at level 1 apparently.
Oh, all right, that makes sense.
Oh my god!
In that session, real quick.
I'm getting flashback vibes to Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep from Borderlands 2. It's just like, yes, you've just spawned into the docks, and there's the sorcerer's dragon, and then like Lilith comes in and she's like, Tina, the player characters can't handle that. You need to like scale the combat back. And she's like, okay, your new boss is a skeleton and his name is Mr. Bony Pants Guy.
I freaking love Assault on Dungeon Keep or whatever it was.
It's so good. It's so good. That's how you do a crossover.
I actually pre-ordered the Bunkers and Badasses actual table thing, and I cannot wait to get that whenever it comes out.
Oh, nice.
Rest assured, I will talk about it on this pod when that happens. But today we're talking about Clue. But yeah, so just wanted to say it's really cool that they announced Giant Tiamat, and hopefully we'll see other badass miniatures coming out. Not that I'll ever be able to afford Tiamat myself, but
I'm disappointed that it comes pre-painted.
How much is it?
I have no clue, but like if big miniatures are anything to go by, it's probably going to be, I'm going to guess, at least $60. Oof.
I'm not saying I endorse it, but you can buy a cheaper one on Etsy now.
All right, so let's move on to the other part of our podcast where we talk about D&D, but I took Clue and shoved it in there, used a hammer and a chisel, and I think it came out all right. I could have done things better, but at the same time, I was dealing with an extremely high-level party, and
13.
That's pretty high. After 10, it's like, everything's pretty much a gamble if you're going to beat them or not. So yeah, so what I did, I'll start off by setting the stage here, then we'll kind of turn this into, Julian and Mike can ask questions to Jason and I about how this went. So what I did is, as the party's in this city called Ramshorn, I explained that there's this eccentric king of the people. He wears peasant clothes, he's got a crown and stuff, and he invites them to his party at his one-story mansion, which I say multiple times.
The one-story mansion.
The
yes.
one-story mansion.
It's very long.
And at the party, they hang out. There's a lot of socializing, a lot of people, and suddenly they notice that there are 6 unique individuals walking around the party. And then I drop the names of, they still haven't figured it out at this point. And then one of our players, Lugos, talks to Mrs. Peacock, but doesn't ask her name, so they don't know.
Oh.
And then I believe it was Henrik who went over and talked to another lady. And he's like, "What's your name?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm Miss Scarlet." And everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's Clue."
For reference, we did not have the map at this point.
Yeah.
It was still imagination.
Yeah, I was using theater of the mind for this. Then once they decided it was Clue, I pulled out the actual board game Clue and put it down on the table. And I purchased, one of the editions of Clue originally came with actual like painted figures with faces and all that stuff. They weren't just little pawns. The edition I had didn't come with those, so I bought some on eBay for $5, and I think they really added to the whole game.
Oh God, I'm so jealous right now.
Basically, the lights went out at one point, came back on, and the king's like, "My best friend, Mr. Body, is dead." I'm not doing the voice. It was very high and screechy.
I was going to say, you didn't do that right. My best friend, Mr. Body,
My
is
best
dead.
friend was murdered.
I can't believe this.
So suddenly this demon shows up who goes by the name of Cluedo and
nice.
says, "One of the guests here is the murderer. You have 3 turns to figure this out." And so the party had to run around the map, entering rooms, talking to the different people, the guests who were trapped there, to figure out who they saw, where, and with what weapon.
What were the 3 turns?
3 turns of combat, technically, even though we weren't fighting things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I didn't want them to I didn't want it to drag for too long, and because they can all move around zippity fast already.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You got to realize that we had a monk, a rogue, a ranger, like a bunch of other people that could like do zippity fast stuff, and then also
one of the bards has a mount.
Yes, one of the bards has a mount, and then also Joe homebrewed the rule that you roll a d6, and then if it's 1, you add extra 5 feet of movement. If you roll a 4, it's an extra 20 feet of movement. So you just multiply it by 5.
That was Joe believing that you roll 2 dice for normal Clue, as we were discussing earlier.
Yes, but it helped.
Yeah, it honestly sped things up, but the idea was you roll the die and then you add your normal speed to, it was a d6 times 5 basically, and you add that to your speed and you can zip around the map to talk to people and figure out information.
Because the Clue map is pretty big.
Yeah, so you pretty much get like double speed almost. Or I mean, you could.
You have a potential of double speed.
Wow.
Yes.
Or if you're our monk who has 50 speed to begin with, she was just like all over the place anyways.
Holy cow.
To begin with, and can dash as a bonus action.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Flash
Crazy.
Gordon.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that happened, but apparently she has 50 speed.
So walk me through like when those turns, if they have 3 sequences of things, like how are they guessing? Like what were they doing? Like what?
So it's very liberal with the action economy in this form, and that was kind of because it wasn't actually like talking and everything. Like they could go into a room, they could use their movement to go into a room, roll an investigation check or a perception check to find, because they had to also find the weapons. Like that was another thing I did, is I had them like try to find the weapons in each of the rooms, and then they could talk to one of the people. And then what I did is I divided everybody up to be either moved more by persuasion or intimidation, and you had there was a certain DC to figure out like 1 bit of information, and then if you passed the DC and chose their correct like alignment, you could get another piece of information. And then if you beat the higher DC, you get all 3 pieces of information. And then the other idea was you were able to use like your skills and stuff to try to like lower the DC, but most of the people didn't take advantage of that.
Oh.
But then, like, they could, I said the talking to them was the action, like, was like the main action.
So, yeah, when I was saying, like, it's 3 rounds of combat, it wasn't actually only 18 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I was thinking it was like 3 rotations of some type of thing.
It's 3 times around each player.
Basically, they could enter a room, investigate it, talk to the person, leave the room, and go to another room and investigate that. and that would be the end of their turn.
So my question for you is, how would you have handled Zone of Truth?
I think it would have automatically succeeded on one piece of information, no matter what the DC is. But because Zone of Truth, you're not forced to talk. They could just keep quiet. I'd probably, you'd still have to pass some sort of check to get more information out of them. I would probably lower the DC, but also the other thing is because of how I spaced out the pieces, I believe Zone of Truth doesn't move. It's like where you set it. So that person would have to cast Zone of Truth every time they went to somewhere else.
And the clue board, if you scale it to D&D size, where every space is 5 feet, it's pretty big.
Right. Yeah, that's all I was thinking about, is that there was maybe like 25 spaces, between rooms. Like if you were to start at one side of the board, that room would be like 20 spaces. So that's a huge room.
If you wanted to cross the entire board, yes. Which is why he implemented the extra movement.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot more sense now.
The secret passages in each of the corner rooms, you had to roll a investigation check to find it, and if you succeeded, it would only be 10 feet of movement to go across the whole board, because I wanted it to be an actual shortcut.
So what was the strategy that the players started with, and then what did it turn into of how they solved it?
Well, solving it, I'm going to say, is a little bit where I kind of wish I could fix it, but I kind of liked where it went, and in that I did a murder on the Orient Express.
It seemed like, honestly, as a player, it seemed a little bit of a cop-out, but I still enjoyed it.
So I also made it so only 2 people could talk to a character. You could only have 2 characters talk to one of the suspects, because, the bards have ridiculously high persuasion and intimidation, both.
Which we have 2 of in that party.
Yeah, so wow. I didn't want that. That's why I had the short time limit and that stipulation, because I didn't want the bards talking to every single person and just passing all the checks. I wanted to encourage everybody to talk. But the thing is, the 2 people who talked to Mrs. White was supposed to be the suspicious one, because she only had locations. She didn't see anyone, and she didn't have any weapons. But nobody passed it, so nobody got any information, so nobody was suspicious of her.
Okay.
So that was the original intent.
So she was the killer then, huh?
She was the decoy. She was somebody who was meant to look suspicious.
Spoilers for Murder on the Orient Express if you've never seen it, but everyone in that, besides the main detective, is the killer. Literally, right. Like every passenger on the train is the person who killed the guy. So I had it so everybody ended up being like sold their soul to this devil Cluedo for whatever reasons. And once they accuse somebody, the person's like, "Oh, good job, you were close, but it was actually everybody." And they all formed into this massive monster, which basically what I did is I took some white tack putty and I took the actual pawns, and I shoved them in there.
It was interesting. It looked like a honestly, it looked like a weird like atom or like virus thing with like all of the little things sticking out of the nucleus. It looked very intimidating.
What were some things that in this that you were hoping that they would do that maybe they didn't do, or maybe they didn't go, like, because you mentioned the one with Mrs. White where they didn't ask her or they didn't pass the question. Was there anything else that you were like, dude, I set this up and you guys didn't even, get it?
That was the main thing, was Mrs. White. Like, that was the thing I was like, this was supposed to be kind of like the decoy. But, like, when they were getting towards the end of it, they had information from everybody, except they were missing one piece of information from Miss Scarlet and one piece of information from Dr. Plum, or Professor Plum.
Miss Scarlet was already the most guilty-seeming person anyways.
Was she it? Or, I guess it was everyone, yeah.
So, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so, but was there like a main thing that you were trying to make, like, really heavily lean on?
I didn't want to give them any like real clues or anything. I wasn't trying to like give anything away. Especially because of how I was going to have it end.
I will say though that the stories that you gave the characters made sense. Like some of the player characters were intent on thinking that it was like Dr. Orchid, but the fact is that when somebody talked to her, you found out that she was a researcher trying to figure out if certain stuff in the water did stuff to, had certain effects on people. And that kind of made sense why there was a lead pipe where she was. And then the next person who went into the kitchen noticed that there was a hole in the wall and a section of piping was missing. It's like, that kind of makes sense. Like, something from here matches up with something from there. It's a weird thing, but I was inclined to believe her.
A couple things. One is one of the reasons to help, the players believe something like that is that all the suspects were in the story were teleported to different rooms, like randomly. Like the lights went out and they came back on and they were in a different room and they had no clue why they were in there and they were not allowed to leave. There was like a magical force preventing them from leaving. The other thing that I did was when I was setting up for this, I took the cards like you do when you're like setting up for Clue, and I put a person, a weapon, and a room down for each person. I put their tokens on top of it just randomly. I didn't pay attention. I didn't choose. And then I would be like, okay, so Colonel Mustard saw Miss Scarlet in the hall with the rope for whatever reason. And then I pulled up and then what was really interesting was I pulled up Miss Peacock and she was saw it was herself, the candlestick in the library. And so so that kind of helped me set the base as I built the stories off for each of them.
Would you want to share any more stories that were like the lead pipe one that were interesting?
I mean, I don't remember too much other. I do remember one where multiple of the suspects' stories confirmed that the Colonel Mustard character had a revolver and he hid it in the study. It makes sense that he would have a gun because he was, he's a military guy and everything, and he was hanging out there. And then when he heard that somebody was murdered, he was like, well, I don't want to be implicated for this, so I'm going to stick this in the bookshelf so nobody thinks that I'm a bad guy. And multiple characters confirmed that there was a revolver in the study and Colonel Mustard was also in the study and stuff like that. So I don't remember everything. This was a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, but those are the two that stuck out to me the most.
I don't remember all of the alibis and stories I had for everybody. The only other one I really remember was I had Mrs. Peacock and Miss White have a scandalous affair in the library, and that was about it.
So what I was going to say is one of the complications with D&D is that you can investigate the body and see hey, what does the body look like? Am I seeing is it blood?
It was conveniently okay. Let me stop you right there. Every time we investigated the body, Mr. DM Joe said, Mr. Body has been killed by conveniently no discernible reason. He is just dead.
Which, I mean, incredible. If you think about the actual Clue game, that's clearly what's going on, too, when people, it'd be so obvious to tell if the guy got bashed in the head or stabbed or shot or something by a weapon.
Strangled, yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking is, I'm glad that you had kind of a workaround with that, but I wonder if it could be even more interesting. Oh, no, it once you die in this house, you vanish, and you're just left there with a pile of dust. Oh, well, yeah, what was this? Too. Yeah. So what would be the setting that you guys were in, D&D setting, or were you guys in a,
it was a fantasy setting, and the Clue board didn't have anything that really suggested otherwise. It was probably upscale, it would be upscale for a fantasy thing, but it was a king's mansion they were hanging out in. So
kitchen, conservatory, study with library.
It didn't have any electronics in it or anything like that. The map doesn't have anything like that.
Out of curiosity, if you were to run that again with a different group, is there anything that you would change from it?
I'd like to do a lower level party next time, and then that way I could have one specific killer. Because the other reason I didn't want one specific killer is because I came up with the idea of Cluedo, the actual boss fight they had at the end of the whole thing, which basically what I did is I took the spell Prismatic Spray and I turned that into a monster that they could fight. So if you don't know Prismatic Spray, the way it works is you roll, or everybody who it would affect rolls a d8, and that tells you what color they're affected by, and then they can roll a dexterity save to either have the damage or negate the effects of whatever it is. So on top of that, because it's 8 colors and I only had 7 suspects on the board, I also shoved Mr. Orange in there, who was a gardener piece, and they were he wasn't even one of the suspects, and it's and the Cluedo's his parents sold his soul or something stupid like that.
Who do you think buried the body?
Poor Mr. Orange.
And one of the mechanics I had was, so Cluedo was the base white part, the center mass, and that took no damage until you got rid of the pawns on the outside. And then each pawn was its own entity, part of the bigger one. So the red one was immune to fire, the blue was immune to cold, so on and so forth. And either as you defeated it, it left and it would do damage to the base, or one of the other mechanics I had was you could remove a pawn, because we had a barbarian in our group who got banished like in round 1, so that didn't really help. But
I was like, so we don't really have a chance to do that.
But that was the original intent of me really planning on them taking pieces off. So like when Cluedo went, Cluedo cast Prismatic Spray every single turn. But when one of the pawns is gone, if you rolled like the blue color and blue is dead, it just does nothing. And then the idea was if the pawns were separated, they would still act on their own, but they would be significantly weaker. They had lower AC, I think I kept the health the same, less resistance, and their cones were smaller and did less damage.
The other thing that I thought of while you were mentioning the setup is, rather than just like having the entire clue board, I personally would have like split the party, and they were like each individual room was its own pocket dimension.
That's interesting. That would definitely like sow chaos.
It would sow chaos, but it would give you more of a chance to role play it out, as opposed to just like, oh, you have 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we had a party of 5 and there are 9 rooms.
I also would have adjusted it based off of the party size.
Of course, the biggest problem I encountered was within round 1, one of the players is instantly banished, which is good because it set up a plot hook for the next arc of the campaign. But the other
let me just ask real quick, was that planned at all? Was like Jeff unhappy with his character and wanted to play a different one, or did he just happen to get banished?
I wanted to banish someone, and Jeff just happened to be the one who failed.
Aww.
Okay.
I had the plot. Actually, you guys know at this point, I banished him to Shadowfell, and I wanted it to be Majira, because Majira already has ties to Shadowfell in our campaign. Majira is one of our monks. She's a Way of the Shadow monk.
How is she tied to Shadowfell?
Well, there's actually more to it than that, but I'm not going to go into it in the podcast. But I wanted it to be her, but it was Bernard, so I was just like, Bernard, you're going to Shadowfell. And then I talked to Jeff about it after. I was like, I don't think they're going to get to you right away, pal. You might need another character. And he's like, I'm cool with that.
Okay, that's why I was like really concerned at first. I was like, do we need to just give up on Bernard? Does Jeff not like playing him anymore? I was like, I like Bernard.
No, he likes Bernard too. It was more because, not to get too spoilery, but I don't even think you guys will find him. You guys won't probably find him next session.
It seems pretty difficult to get there.
Yeah.
Oh man, maybe I was under the wrong impression. How soon was the Clue D&D session? Like, how recent was it from today?
I think that guy said like 2-ish weeks ago.
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks ago. We've played 1 session since.
Oh man, so what was that like afterwards? I don't know, this banishment's really intriguing me because it's so permanent.
There's another factor too that I didn't get to say. The banishment was big, but the other thing is one of our players, who is a rogue, failed their dexterity save and got hit by a petrification spell and failed all 3 of their constitution saves.
So they're stoned.
Ooh.
Wait a minute, so what?
Yeah.
Oh man, that session's crazy.
It was a little bit. We went from a session. We originally had 6 characters. One of our player characters has been absent for a couple of months because of IRL personal stuff, and we have written them out of the story to later be introduced later in the story. So we've had a party of 5, and at the end of this one fight, one of our characters is banished and the other character is like a concrete statue. So we now have a party of 3 and a statue. And
Wait, are you guys lugging it around? Are you guys bringing it around with you everywhere?
Yes, but we haven't really gone very far. That's the thing. We were able to borrow a cart and to get back to the monk's monastery where this statue character calls home was only like a 1.5 day ride from where we currently were in the city.
Also, that's like 1 casting of Greater Restoration away from being.
Well, you see, here's
also
another problem.
Realize
love that there's caveats to this.
We have a bard, we have a shadow monk, and we've got a ranger.
I'd like to enforce. Hold on. Don't go any further. We do have a College of Lore bard. Both the bards are College of Lore bards. Neither of them know jack shit about. I love those guys, but they know jack shit about spells, and they took the spellcasting subclass.
Oh.
And let's just say one of the bards does have the restoration. So I think he only has lesser restoration. I don't think he has enough spell slots to get greater, but one of them does have restoration, the other one doesn't, and bards don't get to change out spells until they level up.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
The one that does specifically is a barbarian who is like 7th level bard, 6th level barbarian or something like that.
Okay.
And he's also banished.
Yeah,
so
he's the one who would have had the restoration on him.
The other bard is a 13th level bard, but they play their character as like a kind of like college dropout who specifically went into entertainment instead. So like they know a lot of stuff and they've still got the textbooks from college, but they might not know everything.
So you're telling me that bard dropped out of college. They dropped out of college to become a stripper.
It's entertaining.
Lugas uses their sword
D&D.
way more than they should for a College of Lore bard. I'm like, there's another subclass that like is better for this. You could be like a sword dancer, and they're like, no, I want to do this. I'm like, okay.
I want to inconvenience my whole party.
Sounds so familiar.
And now they've died approximately like 4 or 5 times, and they now have a lava seal as a mount / animal companion. So I keep buffing them, and they keep dying.
That is an exaggeration. I think Lugos has died 3 times, but it's funnier to say like I've been around the block a couple times. You know?
I've been to the afterlife a handful of times,
and like it wasn't always combat situations or anything like that. Like sometimes it was just like, oh, I drank this enchanted wine and it instantly killed me and sent me to the god mountain.
I think I've talked about it on this podcast before.
You
The
have.
whole going to Mount Olympus and stuff. You got to keep them on their toes. They never know what's going to hit them next.
I'm just thinking as a player in this party, I would be so stressed.
Yeah, no kidding.
There's a quote for our group, and it's like from our tiefling reverend who says, "Sir, our party has 2 brain cells, and Henrik has both of them."
I'm Henrik.
Aw. And so, what is your class that you play?
I play a human ranger who is a
Horizon Walker.
I was going to say.
Oh
portal
yeah,
man.
yeah. I knew that actually. I forgot about that. So okay, so what skills did you use for your Horizon Walking Hunter to help you in the in the clue?
Well, specifically, famously, if I can see it, I can hit it because, as I mentioned, I have like a +13 to hit. So.
Nice.
And he has the sharpshooter feat, so even though his longbow already has a massive range, he now has all the range.
Yes, basically, if it's within 600 feet, I can potentially hit it.
So more of the boss battle than the
So
actual
the
clues?
boss battle thing, that's the thing. Like certain ones of them, I have blazing bowstrings, so I didn't want to hit the fire one. And there was a certain part of Cluedo that was completely immune to physical damage and only took damage from magical type damage. And I don't have that. I have force damage, I have piercing damage, and I have got fire damage. That's it. That's what I've got available.
Oh wow.
So I was kind of dependent on my other spellcasting buddies to be able to do stuff with that. Additionally, at the end of the fight, when Bernard got banished, I'm not really like the smartest in the ways of the arcane. So I tried to do a perception check to see if I could figure out what happened to him. And I figured out that he was banished. And I'm like, okay, well, let me blink. Let me go to the ethereal plane and see if he happens to be there. And he wasn't. It was somebody else that figured out that he went to Shadowfell. But I'm just like, this is about all I can, think to do in the moment.
I'm a
Wow.
3-trick pony, and all 3 of my tricks have been countered.
So as your DM, Henrik, what were you thinking with this whole like clue map? Like, did you have any certain big thoughts going through as I like pulled this out, and how'd you solve this murder?
I thought the clue map was pretty cool. I thought the 3 rounds leading up to the boss fight were pretty interesting, where there were rules that we all had to follow. There were, there were counterbalances in place where we couldn't just auto succeed. Like you said, you didn't want the bards to just talk to everybody. That made a lot of sense. That was cool. Everybody in the party needed to be involved.
It worked really well too, because we haven't played for like months before that session, because I wanted to play. That's what I got that map like months ago when we first were setting that up, that whole session, and I didn't want to like play like online. I didn't want to put a clue board on the internet. It's not as fun if I'm not pulling out an actual like the actual board game board and putting it on the table.
It definitely was worth waiting for in person. We had to wait in person specifically because one of our players works with people who potentially had COVID at the time, but she hadn't worked with those people in a long, 2 or 3 weeks or something. So we were able to meet in person in a basement and, be out around the board in our own little section. And it was pretty good.
That's like my fantasy. I want to play an in-person session so bad, and this one sounds like it'd be the best in person.
I do have another question. How did you feel when I did drop the it was everybody?
As I think I hinted at earlier, I think it was a bit of a cop-out when you were just like, haha, it was everybody, Murder on the Orient Express. And I'm just like, but like, we figured out. So honestly, you said that Mrs. White was supposed to be a decoy. Our party had narrowed it down to Miss Scarlet or Professor Plum, but the only argument for Professor Plum is that he was an asshole. And I'm just like, maybe that's just his personality. Like, he's a scholarly type that doesn't like people. So I was convinced that it was Miss Scarlet. And then you just were like, nah, man, it's everybody. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, I felt a little bit cheated there, and like I did all this detective work and we all like did all our things, and then it was just everybody. But at the same time, the boss fight was so much fun, like I didn't really care too much.
Yeah, I felt it was a bit of a cop-out, but I didn't want to just say, like, I couldn't figure out how to go from point A to point B by having it be one specific person, but then having all of the figures be together to make the boss fight. I couldn't.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I did the cop-out.
And that makes sense. And like I said, the boss fight was a whole lot more fun with the prismatic ray and everything. That it was so chaotic and random, and it makes it more fun.
I think a lot of times after like a nice story, you end up getting that nice boss fight. And even if the boss wasn't as good, but the story was incredible, or vice versa, like the balance of those things is really nice. And I always think Joe does a really good job about that. Because this whole time you guys are talking about this, I'm like, I want to play that. That sounds awesome. But now I know it's who should I investigate? And it actually would be someone. He figured it
was
out.
Everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, short tangent, like with what you just said, the story is over top of based on how difficult the boss fight is. I do recall having a boat battle where our party was on a ship with a friendly NPC and his warforged companion first mate, and we got attacked by pirates. I wasn't really super worried about losing that fight altogether. Like, I figured we could take them, but the fact that it was so flavored and all of the extra details that we had in our fight, where you are on a giant river like miles across, so it might as well be like a lake or an ocean, and it's just two ships circling each other, shooting cannons at each other and trying to, use magic to teleport across and kill the crew and make sure that they don't hit the cannons or stuff like that. It might not have been the most difficult boss fight, but that is my favorite D&D moment of basically ever. I loved that fight.
I don't want to go too deep into it. I would have loved... The only thing I wish we could have done about that fight is if we did it in person, because I actually had like the ships printed out. Like I had like the physical ships like on paper and stuff, and like I had it all mapped out, but then we're like, oh, we're playing online. I'm like, oh shit, I gotta like find maps online of ships and stuff like that, and I'm like throwing things together.
I don't think that hindered it too much because you just had two ships and the entire map was just ocean.
I know, but I had like I didn't feel like I didn't have as many like boarding parties, and like I had some more spells in mind to cast and stuff, but I kind of just lost track of all of that. The other thing is when you're playing, when I had the map physically, like I had the characters, I had the the pieces. I know it wasn't a lot, but it was still enough for me to have to get it together, and then to go from physical to digital is quite a shift in my mindscape.
Yeah, no, that's understandable.
Little did you know that there was that one space that if the ship rolled over it, it would have been attacked by a kraken, adding a whole new level of difficulty.
No. We already killed the kraken. I'm wearing it as armor.
No way. I don't know if that's true or not, because I
is fully
it.
True. So
not
nice. We can't go into this too much. This is for another podcast, but I'll briefly explain it. Barwalk is divided up into 4 sections for one big continent, and it's got a river running across, like how
Like a plus.
Yeah, like a plus, and it starts from the middle and flows out because magic. And in the center was a kraken guarding it, like guarding something. Nobody knew what, but if you sailed directly through the middle of it, the kraken would come out and attack you. And the party dealt with it very early on. I think season 1 even early on, and barely escaped. And then season 2, they came back around and they're like, "Let's go!" And they killed it. Next time I'm doing the kraken underwater, and we'll see how well you survive.
Yeah, that's the thing. We got real lucky with that.
Next time I'm giving the kraken wings.
Yes, the kraken will have wings next time.
It's like those Tremors movies where they just keep getting different abilities.
All right. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we wrap up? Probably our longest podcast yet, but that's what happens when you have a guest. It gets awesomer. All right. So, would you guys like to plug anything? We'll start with our guest.
I have a YouTube that I never do anything on, but occasionally do. youtube.com/SoandJ. I also have Twitter, which I occasionally post depressing things on. Twitter.com at Sir Soenjay, SirSoenjay.
Julian?
I'm not gonna. I don't have anything yet. I'm still working on it. I promise. It's gonna come, and I'm gonna have something. I promise, but I do not still.
Get a MySpace.
I have
Ohio.
MySpace. It's just a bunch of angsty teen posts. I'm assuming I haven't looked at it since 2003.
Heck yeah.
MySpace. Oh my god.
I was going to say get a Twitter, but that just doesn't seem like Julian's style, so.
I don't know what would be. There's a social media out there for me. I just gotta find it. Can I? Yeah, I was gonna say, can I plug my Tinder?
So that's what
Julian, just
that's
plug
on
your
the
own
social
fans.
media.
Plug your OnlyFans.
Yeah. No, I'll work on it though. It's a work in progress.
And as always, I haven't been doing it super lately because life, but I'm streaming on Twitch, twitch.tv/mboron0219. I can show myself being really bad at video games.
Heck yeah.
You can tweet at me at DMJoeThunder. You can email questions, comments, or topic suggestions to thetabletopteampodcast@gmail.com. We also stream on Twitch occasionally. That's twitch.tv/thetabletopteam. Come watch Mike, that guy, or Jason, whatever voice I use. Yeah, come watch us play Murica and hunt cryptids. And I found out I should be saying this also, whatever platform you're listening to us on, please give us a 5-star review, because that boosts our notoriety so people see us in your recommendeds and we can get famous, because that's all we're doing this for, is for the money.
Yep.
I want to be able to plug the podcast at the end of the podcast.
Wait a minute. You're getting money for this?
That's an 800 IQ play. Oh my god.
Well, that's all I got to say. Jason, thanks for showing up for this episode. We'll
man.
definitely have you on again. And welcome to the Tabletop Team.